What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Mets trade deadline special. We are 3 hours away from MLB's trading deadline, and we will be with you for the next half hour live on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Steve Gelbs. We've got a couple of GMs. Who better to talk about the trade deadline than former GMs Omar Minaya and Jim Duquette, and of course, our MLB insider Andy Martino here as well. We want to hear from you. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in, and we will try to get to as many as humanly possible as we try to give you a clear picture of where the Mets are at right now as time starts to tick away towards that deadline. So obviously it has been a crazy 24 hours or so around the league, guys. The Mets to this point still sitting on the sidelines. The Cubs are clearly a team that they're at least engaged with, maybe a Chris Bryant, maybe a Javi Baez. Andy, at this moment, where do you sense things are specifically with the Cubs, but other teams as well right now?
Yeah, they're working hard, Steven, and I'm hearing the same thing that other reporters are hearing because it happens to be true, that they've talked the most with the Cubs. They see the best fit with the Cubs. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that something's going to happen there. They're obviously interested, engaged on many other fronts. They're really looking for pitching. They're well aware that there's uncertainty surrounding Jacob deGrom. There's developing uncertainty, obviously, around Taijuan Walker. That's something that they would love to find a way to cover more innings toward the mid to back of the rotation. So the Cubs fit with Zach Davies, but they also see some potential fits with the Diamondbacks, whether it's Joaquin Soria in the pen or Merrill Kelly, who they've talked about. I don't know that it's necessarily that hot there, but they're checking everywhere. They talked to the Brewers about some starters who didn't turn out to be available. Zach Scott's burning up the phones. And one thing that I'll say about him to reassure Mets fans out there a little bit who are getting impatient, I've noticed a difference with Zach Scott to Sandy Alderson when Sandy was the one running point on this. And it's definitely Scott running point today. He's more aggressive. He's having more conversations than Alderson ever did on a day like this. And he's more plugged in with the current generation of GMs than Alderson is. That's not a knock on Alderson. He knows that. That's why he brought in a guy from a younger generation. And Alderson would tell you that Scott is better at seeing everything that's out there, checking in on all the possibilities and being hyperactive. So if the Mets don't make a deal, it won't be lack of trying. But of course, when an organization's run by Sandy Alderson, they're going to be real stubborn about what they see as overpays as well.
And Jim, I want to get your take on this in just a second as well. But one thing to note as you're talking about Zach Scott and how plugged he is in with this generation of GMs and presidents of baseball operations, remember specifically with the Cubs, one of his best friends in the game is Jed Hoyer, who they worked together back in the Red Sox days. So, certainly a relationship there as the Mets, again, try and see if there's a fit. Jim, I'll go to you, though. Similar question to Andy. Where do you sense the Mets are right now with their tentacles out?
So, to Andy's point, listen, they're trying to be aggressive. They're starting to run out of options, right? So, we've long seen this. Max Scherzer was not an option for them. He wasn't going to approve a trade there. It was Jose Barrios, who they checked in on, saw the price tag was really high. He just went to Toronto for a steep price. A former top 5 pick in Martin, the outfielder, infielder, and then, of course, former Met prospects. Woods Richardson was on the move again in that deal. The Mets didn't want to give up that type of package for Barrios. So you're starting to run out of names. John Gray for the Rockies, it's been reported, and I found this out a couple of days ago, didn't seem like they were going to move him. He's seemingly off the table at this point. And so, there's not an awful lot that you can go to. Now, Davies for sure is a real possibility. Any of those starters there with the Cubs outside of Hendricks, it doesn't sound like Hendricks is going to be available. Bullpen piece for sure, but Baez, Bryant are still on the table for position players. So to me, that seems like the best fit. As Andy mentioned, they've had multiple conversations with the Diamondbacks on Soria. Kelly seemed like it was a price tag was going to be too high as well for them, and I don't even know at this point if Arizona's going to move him. But they're as you get closer, there's under 3 hours now. You start to see options that run out. It doesn't mean that they won't do it. And we've seen over the last couple of deadlines, even with the Mets, we saw Cespedes get traded late, but we've seen even last year deals get announced after the trade deadline. So be patient, Mets fans, because they are trying to make a deal, and I still expect them to make a deal.
Why do you say be patient? Do you think they're not being patient right now? Are the fans clamoring for something right now?
I don't know,
No,
Gelbs. You see him more often. Are they being patient with you?
A little of that. Hey, so Omar, if you were in the front office right now, what would you be looking to do? This is a team that's been in first place since May 8th. The division is clearly right there for the taking. They've not played great baseball over the last, couple months or so, but the rest of the division has kind of been exactly the same. Do you look at this team right now and say, hey, we gotta go all in and try and go for it? Or do you take the longer view with where this organization is right now?
Well, listen, being there many years, many trading deadlines, and especially being in the big market that we are as the Mets, to me, when you have a chance, and listen, first of all, I think the division is down. I think that, look, anytime you have a chance to first of all, get in the playoff, which is very important. And anytime you have a chance to go deep, because you know that with your pitching staff, and listen, this is all really about the ground. The ground has to be healthy to do that. Having all your information, I am out there, and I've been known one to be somewhat, and Jim would know that, and other guys would know that. I'm an aggressive guy. I believe in once you have a window to go get in the playoff. And listen, you start the year out by trying to win the World Series. You're a big market club. You have added Lindor. You've added these kind of players. You have a good team. You have a good manager. You have good chemistry. There's a lot of good things going on with this team and this organization right now. So to me, I am out there trying to upgrade this team. And understanding for me is simple. Because the division is down, if I get a piece or two, or another one or two big pieces, and I do think the pieces are definitely, it's got to be starting pitching you got to be careful with. I believe bullpen you have to be careful with, because at the end of the, when you look at this whole year, our bullpen has been used a lot, but anytime you get a chance to get a big offensive player, whether it's Brian, whether it's Baez, it's just going to separate me from my competition within my division. Let's be honest. The wild card is not coming out of the East, so you have to win the division. And anytime you get a chance to get a big piece to separate myself and get into the playoff, that's what I'm doing. I am looking at that. Now, don't get me wrong. What is it that I need to give back? That's the question. Whether when there's Minnesota, how much do they want back? I did hear, similar to what Jim heard, that and also Andy heard, that they asked for too much. So I'm for going for a big piece. I'm for anytime you have a chance to go win, go get it. But it has to be reasonable. And, just being in the playoff is huge in this market.
Well, if I may jump on that a second, Omar, this is why the job that you guys have held and what Zach Scott's doing right now is obviously so tough, trying to strike that balance. I'm on this side personally as a follower of the game who loves that aggressive nature, the way you did it, the way Brody did it, even though it didn't work out in Brody's couple of years. Just that going for it mentality is a way to respect what your players and your fans are looking to do. But at the same time, and by the way, you hear around the Mets organization that Steve Cohen himself is not looking at winning the division. He's like, okay, this year is better than expected. Can we try to use this trade deadline to win a World Series? So all that is there and all that is fair. And you have to grab the opportunity when it's there for you. But that being said, on the other hand, Sandy Alderson's there, and Cohen hired him to have that veteran executive perspective and really be realistic about where this team is at. As much as the Mets are having a good year, as much as anything that can happen in the playoffs, the Dodgers just acquired Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. The Padres are in full on go for it, win now mode. Mets are one of the better teams in the league, but are they really at the peak of that window, or are they a team that's a postseason team now and you continue to build over the next few years? So far in the refusal to go big on a Barrios, it shows that they aren't quite in all-in mode. And as much as fans want the instant gratification, striking that balance is probably the wise thing to do, even if it means, not a happy fan base at 4:00. We'll see how that goes.
Well, so here's the thing, and I want to discuss all this because, Omar, you said that you'd be aggressive, but it has to be reasonable. And the question really becomes, what is reasonable, right, guys? Because kind of to Andy's point, when you look at the way that this season is breaking down for the Mets and the future of this team in the postseason, should they make it, yeah, they could go out and they could trade for a Chris Bryant or a Javi Baez or a Trevor Story, right? And that would certainly be a huge jolt right now, would make a big impact. They'd be a better team. But when you look at the fortunes, right, and I said this on the air the other day, it's probably all going to come down to whether or not Jacob deGrom comes back and is healthy and can be healthy through October. And quite frankly, whether the guy who's on the mound tonight does the same. If Carlos Carrasco can be the Carlos Carrasco of old, if those two guys are back and healthy, if Noah Syndergaard can come back and be a weapon out of the bullpen, if Francisco Lindor comes back and keeps trending upward, all of a sudden that team is a really hard out. If that doesn't happen, especially if Jacob deGrom does not come back and is not what he was, I find it difficult to feel like this team will be able to compete with the likes of the Dodgers in the playoffs. And so if those big guys are going to cost you top prospects in a system that's been depleted, that they're trying to build back up, that is very top heavy right now, it becomes a very difficult question to answer and to say, what is reasonable? What do we give up? Is this the year? So from that perspective, what would be reasonable? Jim, I'll start with you. What is reasonable if you're talking about specifically the big bats out there, Trevor Story, Javi Baez, and Chris Bryant?
So I think that the only way, and you have to look at what's been traded, also by comparison, because that becomes the ask moving forward, right? And so every GM that you're dealing with is taking a look at what was just dealt and trying to top that, right? So what the Dodgers just did with Scherzer and Trey Turner, they gave up their top two prospects. The Dodgers hardly ever give up top prospects, like never give them up during the Andrew Friedman era. And they gave up their top two. Now they're lesser in the game, they're top 40 or so. But that's for Max Scherzer and Turner, who are two all-stars. And those, and Scherzer's obviously a rental. Turner you would control. So, the guys that you're talking about there, Steve, they're both would be rentals, Baez and Bryant. Kimbrough you'd have under control if you were going to try to trade for somebody like that. But that's now the asking price from Jed Hoyer going forward. So it's going to be, if it's not your top prospect in an Alvarez or a Mauricio, it's that next level, which you've been reluctant to do. And I would be reluctant to do. I think I agree with you guys. This team is good enough to win the division right now. If they did nothing else today, you would be disappointed, but the Braves haven't done enough. Phillies certainly haven't done enough. And we know where the Nationals and Marlins are. So they can win a division, but trying to compete with the Dodgers and whatever, that to me is going to be a bigger type of deal. I'd love to see that happen. But I don't know if I'm willing to give up a top 5 prospect for that to happen. That's where I think I would draw the line if I were the Mets. And
do you guys agree that that's what it would cost? We have some questions from YouTube and Facebook. Delvin on YouTube asked, what would the package of Gray and Story cost? Joe on Facebook, what would Bryant, Baez, Davies cost? Guys like that. Do you agree, especially given the rental status versus, a guy like Trey Turner, who does have another year of control? Is it going to cost that level of prospect? And if it doesn't, and here's the other thing again, if it doesn't, the Mets prospects are very top heavy, and then there's a dip. They don't really have that many of those mid-level guys. So for the Mets, is that cost that steep?
Well, go ahead, Omar.
I think that exactly what Andy said. And first of all, the key thing that Andy says is I believe in being aggressive but smart. You cannot being aggressive and not smart is not the way to go. And I think that's what the Mets are doing right now. And I expect that's what probably Sandy and Zach and that group is going to do. Now, that being said, to me, a top level prospect for the organization, the way the game is and the way the game values prospect, you don't give a top level premium prospect, and I use the word top level. It might be you may have 4 or 5. Every organization may have 3, 4, or 5 of those guys. Okay, you don't give that for a rental. That's just not the way it is. The Dodgers did give premium prospect, but they got Turner, and Turner has another year of control. So to me, the line is from a rental. There is no way that I'm going to go give one of my blue chip guys for a rental. It's just not going to happen the way the game is, right? And if it does, listen, I just don't see that happening. So it's really kind of, can you give me somebody that I can control beyond this year? Okay. That's going to help me not only during the run and beyond this year. then you can start having consideration, and then you can define which one of those quote unquote top level prospects that you would consider putting in. That's how I see. I think the Mets are probably going to be smart about this, and I believe that Andy has a real good feel. The history of how the front office here is in place is going to be moving, but it's just about control beyond this year. That's the line. Besides that, do a little bit like what the Yankees have done, is package a whole bunch of other guys that are not top level, and even sometimes maybe eat some money if you have to. And Jim Duquette, knows that pretty well. How you be creative and add some guys by buying some prospect money wise and giving you so prospect. Those are the creative way you can get there.
I think, Steve, just looking a little deeper into the question you asked too, the market for rental bats so far this year has surprised the industry. The prices have been higher than they usually are and expected. Omar, of course, is absolutely right. Usually rental bats don't get you much, and it might, by 4:00, we might see that becoming the trend again. But really, the first couple deals, some teams jumped early, and that's part of it. But the Rays gave up a good pitching prospect in Joe Ryan for Nelson Cruz. The A's gave up Jesus Luzardo, the young pitcher, for Starling Marte. That surprised people. And then a little more relevant to the Mets because it was last night, so close to the deadline, and it was the Cubs. The Yankees did something to get Anthony Rizzo that the Mets might not be able to do because of what you've all been talking about, where the Mets system is at. It's top heavy. The top few guys are good. But what the Yankees did was deal from depth, low-level guys who have some ceiling, who are kind of like mid-range prospects, but still appealing enough for another club to jump at for a rental. Decent package that the Cubs got those two young Yankees guys. And I don't know that the Mets have that equivalent in their system. Now that's up to the acquiring teams. Maybe the Cubs scouts value some Mets players that we don't see them valuing, and it would be a pleasant surprise for the Mets. But so far, and this includes Rizzo last night, prices have just been pretty high. So if the Cubs are able to get what they got for Rizzo from the Yankees, that would explain why the Mets haven't gotten anything done for Bryant or Baez yet, because the Cubs' expectations will be pretty high. And Brian Cashman is in win now mode. Let's save everybody's jobs and try to make the playoffs. That's where the Yankees are at. Sandy and Zach Scott are like, we're in year one of the whole thing here. So that's a big difference in who you're willing to move. So
I want to get the former GMs on this because other teams are making moves. We've talked about the really high-end teams, right? The Dodgers going for broke. Even the Yankees, who I know the Mets aren't competing with right now, but there's always the crosstown thing going on, and everybody understands that. And just now, multiple reports that the Braves have made multiple moves. The Braves acquired Eddie Rosario from the Indians. He's hurt right now, but should be coming back in a couple of weeks. And Adam Duvall going back to the Braves as well. So the Braves, after taking the series this week, feeling like, all right, they're gonna at least attempt it. So let's say you're a front office member. You've got this plan. Hey, we're sticking to this is the line. We're not going to cross it. We feel good about our chances as is if it has to be. All of a sudden, in the last 24 hours, big things start to happen. From a GM's perspective, is it easy to stay the course, or does everything start to turn? Does everything start to change in these last few hours? Do you maybe say, oh, well, we got to get more aggressive now? We can start, Jim, with you.
Okay. Well, I think, listen, what matters is your division and in the National League. So you're monitoring what you think is best for you, but you're also monitoring the competition too. So if in fact Atlanta's gotten improved in that area, and listen, I think Duvall is a huge piece that they were lacking from last year. Why their offense, and they're missing Acuna, and so they haven't really, you can't really replace him. But what they're adding is significant enough. Then maybe you're willing to, where you were showing a restraint before this, maybe you're willing to add a piece that you didn't want to prior, and I think that's where, when you get to the final 3 hours, you've pushed and you're negotiating. It's gone through this too. You're like, I'm not giving this guy up, or I'm trying to knock the price down so that I don't give up that last prospect. But at the end, if you're still sitting there and you haven't done anything and the competition has, that changes sometimes to your willingness to give up a piece, and you start to feel that need and desire to do something. So, I think that would change. Like, again, we're talking about the guys we've talked about before on other shows, Mark Vientos, the names like that, Junior Santos, that level. You might be willing to give up 2, but you're not willing to give up a third. And now you're like, geez, maybe I will give a third guy in a type of deal to go for a rental. Is it a little bit expensive for your taste? Yes. But you also want to end up doing the deal and consummating the deal. So that's the thing that you constantly are having that discussion in the room with your guys. Like, do we do this? Do we bite the bullet? And at the end of the day, you have to really kind of weigh that. And I think generally when O and I were in the room, it was like, yeah, we can replace those guys. You know, the environment's changed a little bit here recently, but you can't hold on to all these prospects.
Yeah, and like Jim said, look, I can tell you maybe because of my scouting background, I feel always good that I can replace talent, more so because I feel, we can get talent. Now, that being said, and to answer your question as far as if another team makes move, do you feel like your instincts say, oh, wow, these guys made a move. Maybe I need to make a move. For me, it's in there. You think about it, and you especially think about it in a big market like New York. Okay, so there is that instinct to do that. First of all, I don't believe that you do something because somebody else does something. I really don't. Even though you got to fight that, you really got to fight that. I do believe that you have a thought in your mind. You have a process. You got to stick to your process. What you believe in. You want to listen to the room. The room may react. And what's going on right now in the room right now, or your scouts, your pro scouts, and then you also have an ownership component that's kind of listening, that's following what's going on, and that's going to come into play right about. And Jim can tell you that right about that last hour. Then all those forces come together, and you as a leader and a general manager, you have to pretty much stick to what you believe in. Now, I will tell you this. It's a little different when you're sitting down today and you're 3.5 or 4 games up and you feel good about your team. You react different if you're behind with Atlanta than if you're in front. Like Jim said, I think the Mets don't have to do a move, and I still believe they can win this division. Okay? So when you don't feel like you have to do a move, and it's a total different ballgame, it's a total different mindset, and I'm not going to be reactionary. I don't expect Sandy and the group there and Scott to be reactionary. They're going to, and Sandy's very big on process. I believe it's a process, and this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to stick to the process. And there's nothing wrong when it's all said and done, and you're still in first place when you wake up tomorrow morning.
Andy, the one thing that Omar mentioned too, he kind of slipped it in there, is that ownership comes into play at some point too. And talking to some people over the last couple of weeks, that's the one wild card, is that this is the first go round with Steve Cohen, and you don't know how he's going to react in certain situations. And just something else to throw out there, he has expressed a willingness to go over the luxury tax if it works, right? And we know that he has put it out there that he will do everything in terms of resources to put this team over the top. Maybe not this year, as he has stated that they're not going to spend like drunken sailors. This isn't about doing something stupid immediately, and they want to build up the farm system and everything else. But is there an element as well when you're sitting there as a front office and you've got an owner that if you deplete one area, he'll go out there and go fill it. If you have to go out and get a free agent, he'll go out and get a free agent. Does that change the dynamic at all? And do you have any sense, Andy, as to how much Steve Cohen is playing into what's happening in these waning hours here?
Yeah, those are great questions. And this is the reason why I've been really careful this year not to try to get too definitive on publicly saying what I think might happen, no matter what I'm reporting, because I'm covering a different organization, different franchise than the one I've covered previously since starting the Mets. And you do have this, most teams have owners who are factors in one way or the other. And obviously this situation's no different, and this one is a wild card. Frankly, Steve, I hear 2 different things about Cohen, and I've talked to a lot of people about the dynamic there. One is that he trusts Sandy for the reasons why he hired him, which is do the process, don't give up the prospects, don't go crazy, and do the smart thing. Steve Cohen didn't become so successful in business and be self-made by making irrational decisions and taking stupid risks. Quite the contrary. So there's that, and that's true. But as I alluded to earlier, I do hear that he's a little itchy to win a World Series. Someone who knows him really well was like, you know what, Steve started this year with reasonable expectations in year 1, and now he can smell it. And that's cool. That's all well and good. So without trying to get inside his head too much, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple hours, those are little warring factions. Like, is there a devil and angel on each of his shoulders? But he's definitely involved. He's definitely into it. I mean, there aren't too many owners that are, soliciting reader polls on Twitter for what to do. And his mind is on it. He's in touch with Alderson. He's in touch with Zach Scott. The Mets have a history of active ownerships, and Steve Cohen's no different in that regard. And I am very interested to see if he stays cool and calm and process oriented at 350, or if he starts yelling at somebody to go get something crazy. I think it's a totally fair question.
Guys, we've got 5 minutes left here before we wrap this one up. So I want to get each of your takes, relatively quickly here with what is left on the market, everything we've discussed. If you're sitting in that chair, you've got one move to make. What is it? Omar, let's start with you.
Well, the one move to make, of course, got to be pitching. You got to get the best pitcher that's out there if he's available. To me, that's the safety net. The offense is coming together, and don't get me wrong, these guys. But to me, it's pitching, and like we said, it's all about the ground. If the ground is okay, we need to add to it. I think you can get it. You're going to get in, but you got to have insurance in the pitching. The pitching has pretty much. You got to understand the other thing about the pitching, that because last year was a shortened year, a lot of these guys are being stretched out longer than they have been because a year off. So what you get at the back end of here, it's so kind of it's pitching if it's available and it's reasonable, and that's what I would be looking at, and that's what I would be doing. Jim?
So I think I agree. I think that if you did one thing, it would be pitching. We know the starting rotation with the asking price is pretty steep, so I would focus more on the bullpen at this point. And so like Ian Kennedy, Joakim Soria, that group of guys, there's still a good number of them available. I would try to focus on one or maybe even two of those and go down that route. And because I think hit on this in particular too. The workload on the bullpen so far has been pretty heavy. We've seen that, the rotation lately hasn't been going deep. They've been averaging about 5 innings per start, in some cases less than that. And they're going to need a blow as well. Like everyone's worried about workloads with the rotation. Bullpen has workload issues that you have to be concerned about too. So adding another quality arm or two in that, I think would help with that.
I agree. I agree with what both of you guys are saying, but I'll go with the Steve Cohen. I'm not sure if it's the angel or the devil that says win the World Series this year. That depends on your perspective. But for the World Series winning move, I think the one player on the market that would have the most impact on the Mets' chances to win the World Series is Craig Kimbrell. I'm not saying they're going to get Craig Kimbrell. I think Jim's, by naming Soria and Kennedy, is being more realistic. And to be fair, and Jim and I talked about this a little offline, Kimbrell wasn't even closing the World Series for the Red Sox the year that he was on that team. He didn't pitch great in the postseason, but he's been great right now. He's one of the best closers in baseball history in his whole body of work. And some combination of Kimbrell and Diaz locking down the last couple of innings of the game with the rotation questions that they have might be the surest path deep into October.
I second that. I know I 1-1, but I can't help myself. I think across the board. When I say pitching, I mean across the board. And I think Andy's and to Duke's point, Kimbrell, bullpen, but pitching across the board, that's what I would be considering doing. Great call on Kimbrell.
Well, you know what? Zach Scott, he talked about it the other day, and we know this, and we've discussed it a lot over the last couple of years, but I know the traditional way to think about it is starter, reliever, and the way that the Mets and most of baseball thinks about it, especially as you get into the bullpen, is innings, is just eating up innings. And so whether it's a starter, whether it's a reliever, a guy like Taijuan Walker, he's already pitched well beyond the number of innings that he's pitched combined over the last 3 years. Noah Syndergaard comes back. Maybe he's not a traditional starter, but maybe he comes and gives you an inning or two at 100 plus miles per hour constantly out of the pen. So any and all arms, I agree. I was going to wrap this up at 1:30, but I've gotten word from our producers that apparently we're not doing an absolutely terrible job right now. So they want us to keep it going for a little while longer. I will say this, that I have to leave for the ballpark pretty soon, so can't go that much longer. But let me ask you this, okay? Because we talk about the pitching. The one thing that's been interesting about the offense, and by the way, I'm with you all on the pitching, and I've said that on the air, but I have started to think a little bit over the last few days as the offense has started to sputter a little bit again. this offense should be one of the best in it. We talk about it all the time. This offense, we've seen it in the past. These guys have track records. And now we're getting into August, and, you know, for some of them it's coming on, but for some of them, not quite, right? Not yet, anyway. We saw, and it was a different situation, but we saw in 2015 what the impact of a guy like Cespedes did, not just with what he brought, but the charge that he brought to that group across the board, right? You know, again, if you're sitting there as a front office member, and even if you're thinking to yourself, hey, pitching is the way to go, is it at all enticing to think if you can get a rental bat like that, who maybe is, you know, theoretically a nominal upgrade over, let's say a Chris Bryant, if you just look offensively, you know, JD Davis is having an incredible year right now and has been having a pretty good offensive stretch here since the Mets acquired him. Maybe it's not an extreme upgrade over JD Davis, but if you bring in a bat like that, is there a certain jolt to the system? And I'll add one other thing. We have talked a lot about prospects, right? And the Mets' unwillingness to give up prospects. I think, Andy, you put it out there in a tweet maybe yesterday or the day before, hey, the Mets were willing to part with J.D. Davis for Chris Bryant before. Yep. What's to say that's changed? I think Joel Sherman mentioned in a column, you know, a Dom Smith, a Jeff McNeil. Are we thinking about this too narrowly? Is it not just about prospects, or could the front office be enticed to, if you're going to bring in a bat, move out a major league bat that maybe has a little more control rather than part of the prospect? Just as we kind of discuss all of these options, is that something that the front office has been considering that maybe the public isn't talking about as much?
Yes. And those are good, interesting questions raised. McNeil's a really interesting one because Sandy Alderson's teams really like players at the top of the lineup that work the count, like Brandon Nimmo. Not necessarily. I don't get the sense that McNeil's a guy that they're super, super attached to long term. That doesn't mean that they don't think he has value and that they would move him readily. But yeah, I could see guys like that in conversations. The one thing I would worry about, and if everyone here, Steve, you're the best one to address that, but just like
the chemistry.
Yeah, and that's a real thing. And so if Chris Bryant is a marginal he's not a marginal upgrade over JD Davis because of his defensive versatility, but he's not a guarantee to get you to the World Series. And I know the Mets front office is cognizant of this, but just does that give the room a nice jolt like when Cespedes got here, or are the guys depressed because they lost one of their friends? Those are the things that I think they're probably.
Take us through it, GMs, right? I mean, it's just why I'm throwing it out here, because it's worth discussing, and I feel like we're so focused, right, on the prospects that the Mets don't seem publicly and privately really, you know, urgently willing to give up. So, how do you make deals work? Do you pivot at all, and do those factors come into play, Jim? When you're talking about those major league guys, how much do you take the temperature of the room?
Well, I think that's the underrated aspect that in the current role, some of the newer general managers aren't maybe considering as much, is the chemistry in the clubhouse. And you saw what happened out in Seattle. Jerry Dipoto is a former player, and he decides to trade a popular guy in Kendall Graven, who was closing out games. And the revolt was fierce. It was quick. And I think if you look at their moves that he's made, I like the moves. And I think they're a better team this year and next year, but they traded a real popular guy in the clubhouse. And I think you do run that risk. Now, he didn't communicate it that well. It's a little different situation here with the Mets. I think, you know, there's better communication there with this team. It's a relatively new one. So there's a lot of different extenuating circumstances, but you do have to factor that in. And personally, if you're looking at, like, if you're giving me a mulligan right now, because we're extending this show, I'm going to take the mulligan and say, give me a guy that fits. So if Bryant doesn't perfectly fit, Baez might. Now, Baez isn't a Sandy Alderson type of player because he's a low on base guy, but man, oh man, can he defend? He can play shortstop right now while you have a need for Lindor. And he's already said he'd be willing to move over to second base, and he gives you a power component. Like, that would be a really interesting fit. And I feel like that's an Omar Minaya move. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then you got me. You know, Jim, you jumped in there in front of me because it's funny you said that. Steve, that was your point. And I said, please come to me first, Steve. Let me tell you this, okay? because Jim knows.
Just interrupt Jim next time. Just
right.
say stop.
I just take him. Yeah.
Jim knows me so much, and you're right. And when you brought up 2015 and all that, the one guy that I'm out there, and Jim knows it, the one guy that I'm going to go get is going to be Javier Baez. And Jim broke down a little bit of that. First of all, he is a streaky. He's a guy. I used the word from an evaluation. He's a streaky hitter who can take over the game. He will improve the defense. You know, you talked about Cespedes. So who is the Cespedes out there? Who is the guy? And I say the word is, listen, this guy can just get, when he gets hot, he just takes over. And that's what Cespedes did. I'm a Baez guy because he's an athlete and he improves the defense. Everything that Jim said before me, and I'm almost repeating it because Jim knows me, and I'm like, there he goes. He knows what I was going to say. You go get that kind of guy. He's a difference maker. And I understand the numbers, the data, and all that. Those data, and he's won a World Series, and he's been in playoffs. So there's a lot of that stuff. He's an impact guy. And to me, he's the guy that, Steve, this is the guy that I'm saying, okay, this is my guy. I'm going to put my name on him, and his energy and his toughness, and he fits in New York. So to me, from a position player standpoint, that's the guy that I'm going after.
Can I ask the two GMs a quick question? Assuming you trade for Baez, he's your second baseman by obviously later in the season when Lindor comes back. In that situation, where's Jeff McNeil? Is he traded? Is he super utility? Is he on the bench? Like, what are you doing with McNeil when Baez is your second baseman in the postseason, say?
Well, McNeil, the good thing about McNeil and Baez, they're good athletes. They're versatile. So don't forget McNeil. So, he can play anywhere. Let's be honest. McNeil played the outfield. He played third base. He's going to be in the lineup because he is a key guy. You see what I'm saying? But McNeil, both those guys. Listen, I would not be afraid to put Baez in the outfield because he's that good of an athlete. Those kind of guys are versatile.
Here's the question, Omar, and this was I'm circling back to my original point, but if you get a Baez or a Bryant or a Story, right now, there's a spot where you can fit them in, right? And nobody on the Major League roster has to move, right? You can fit them right in, and JD's playing third, and you've got your middle infield and whatever. The second Lindor comes back, one of the major impact guys in this lineup does not have an everyday spot. So if you are going to acquire one of them, does one of those guys have to go? That's like, do you think that those guys can all coexist, and you're moving, whether it's Dom or Jeff or JD to a bench role, or in that deal, if you're making that deal, does it have to be a major league guy in there? I have great confidence in the manager, who was a great communicator. This manager can get it done. And listen, let me tell you, when you go win, forget about feelings. This is about winning a World Series, okay? And Jim can talk a little bit about that. We've been there. I've been as a general manager where you have to make a tough trade. You have to, sit somebody down. We're talking about winning a World Series here, boys, and we're in this together. And this is not about getting people's hurt feeling. It's putting the best team out there. And we've seen it where when it comes to World Series time, like you said, Kimbrel didn't pitch, or whether it was you had the catcher, Grandal wasn't catching in the World Series. Once we get to August, September, it's about putting the best team on the field. This is not about hurting people's feeling. And it helps that you have a great manager that's a great communicator that's going to make it work. He is certainly that. Well, fellas, it started off a little rough, okay? I was told we were all wearing SNY polos, and then the joke was on me, okay?
I was not told that. It wasn't a trick.
But it ended well with them extending us by an extra 10 minutes. I do have to run right now, though. There is plenty more coverage, obviously, all day today. We'll be out at Citi Field, BNNY at 6 o'clock. Mets pregame at 6:30. Black uniforms coming back at 7 o'clock. Wow. Carlos Carrasco. Who knows who else? I'm not even going to let Andy talk about the black jerseys because he'll get everybody on social media angry. Okay, so.
They already are.
For Andy Martino, for Omar Minaya, for Jim Duquette, I'm Steve Gelbs. Thanks for watching the Mets Trade Deadline Special. What are we, 2 hours and 21 minutes away? We will see. Should be an exciting next few hours.